So practically speaking, we've got this world that we're sitting in at the moment.
Yes.
You
Yes.
talked about two elements. One is not really understanding customer priorities, needs, emotions, being close enough to what drives their interests and instincts. Um, we haven't spent a great deal of time on that. What would you like to see improved in that space of listening? I mean, for example, let me give you one thing I always think is important. I think it's wonderful that NPS, actually tracking back to what you said, has become that thread that has gone across the Tom Siebel point, I think, and brought people together. It's allowed a
Yeah.
certain amount of shared accountability. It has got its critics, but nonetheless, it's functioning to unite people in a common perspective. So we'll say
Exactly.
it's a good point. Um, I also think, though, that interestingly, the best form of communication you can ever have with another human being is what we're doing right now. I know we're not face to face, but we are fully attentive. We are
Exactly.
writing the thing. Our
Yes.
imaginations are being opened up. And from that comes exploration and discovery.
Yes.
If ever I was going to understand a customer, that's how I would prefer to do it. Now, the trouble with that is I can't do that if I have many, many, many customers. So we then have to start finding ways of scaling that. And NPS as a score for me sits at the level of the least engaged, because probably I'm sure a customer never really hears the question, which is, would you actually, as a result of what you've just done with me, really recommend what's just happened to another person you know in your life? And if you ask them to actually consciously think on that, probably the answer is no, of course not.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we actually get customers to really disclose not what they think they should say, which is a well-known problem that we've got in research? And one of my answers is I always think that we should triangulate research, getting it from as many different sources that we can, because probably if we get a consistent signal from customers from those different sources, rather like, by the way, GPS signaling, you get you triangulate by hearing it from different spaces and places. Bringing that together probably gives you a much more realistic insight into customers. So there's not a really single view on that. You just need a series of rich sources continuously coming in to see what, for me, are the primary signals and the primary points. And I think far too often we obsess on the difference between 47 and 48%. And quite frankly, so what? Who cares? It's more to do with the big red marks on the journeys that say this is insanely effortful. We hate it. We're about to go, because most organizations still ain't cracked the basics there.
Um, I'll make one bold statement. I hated MPS since the first time it was invented.
Yeah.
The second element to it is it was a good sign that we were actually tracking customer engagement and customer experience. So that was the good thing
Yes.
about it. It
Yeah.
was a horrible measurement, um, but the fact that we're doing it was okay. And therefore, well, I didn't think it would take off that much in it tells us a little bit of where the business is at the moment if we're still hanging on to the NPS score.
Yeah.
For me, it was a good score at the beginning, but it shouldn't be here anymore. I very much more like the customer effort score in that perspective. Why? Because it talks about effort. And that because that's where the key is as far as I am concerned. How easy is it to engage with you as an organization? And I will only know that as an organization, and now I'm starting to be a broken record, if I have data to properly design the experience the customer would like to have.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
and, and
Foundation.
and that's for me that's the sentence and the core of what things are all about.
Yes.
Um, um,
Incidentally,
um,
interesting to note that many people will tell you, if you are still into NPS, the single greatest driver to winning it or losing it is effort.
yeah, yeah. Well, that tells you something. So you can use NPS okay, but then track the movement. Don't
Yeah.
track the number. Track
Yes.
the movement
Yes.
of how much better you have become in a year's time. Instead of saying 48 is a good score or 65 is a good score. I don't know what that is. But anyway, Understanding your customer by using data is the most important thing that is out there in order to be able to design. And then we talked about voice of the customer, feedback management, more or less, which is great. But also, second of all, just understanding the journey that they have been on with that kind of analytics that is out there. But what I also find just very simple also to do when when a marketing organization introduces a new product, what do? They go to a panel, they have a panel, an anonymous panel discussion, they test the different logos, the colors, and everything that they do. Whenever we introduce a new channel, and there has been a lot of channels introduced over the last couple of years, nobody ever did a channel to ask whether the customers would like it, whether the experience was good, whether it was a good journey for them, whether they want to do it self-service, or to what constituency it actually helped. Nobody ever did that.
Yes.
Which I find extremely strange. And I vividly remember an interesting story with a insurance company in the US on the West Coast who said to me, we want to introduce live chat. Great. This was in 2016 or 17 when I was at Gartner. And I said to them, okay. So I gave them all the statistics of don't have enough, too many conversations per agent. Don't have enough back and forth and stuff like that. But then I said to them, have you asked your audience whether or not you would like to have it? Because during their briefing to me, they said they had a 50+ audience. And I said, have you asked whether your 50+ audience in terms of age is willing to do live chat with you? Yes. Yeah, but it gives us great operational efficiency. And I asked them, I said, don't do it. Because if you ask your constituency and they say, well, we just want to talk to you because that's what we're used to be doing. We're not that digital engaged yet. You will only provide a bad experience. You will not get the operational efficiency because they will call you 5 times instead of that one live chat in terms of business case. And it will be terrible. They did it anyway and came back like half a year later and said, you were right. And it's not about me being right, but the point that I want to make is ask your constituency if they are willing to go on that channel and whether or not the way that you have designed it is a effortless way of how they would engage with you or get something done in terms of handling a request or handling a complaint or doing a sale or whatever it is. And that's very much what we're missing at the moment in terms of that understanding. And that is also data in understanding customer behavior. And while we do have all those sources in the way that we're doing it, this is a simple, essential thing that we are missing, and other parts of the organization with introduction of a new product are doing themselves well.
Maybe one of the aspects of your point about short-term gains is this, that if you just take that case, and by the way, it's not a question you've been right, that is just the fact out there that many, many people have taken on a channel because it's either 3 times or 7 times, God forbid, if it becomes messaging, better than the incumbent voice channel, and the nonsense that goes with that. And the business case formula that sits there is always based on our objective rather than the customer objective. And how many business cases do you see saying this satisfies the reduction of effort and the promotion of ease to nth degree? And that's still a very uncommon thing. And if I think about the people that I engage with in the technology community and saying, seriously, you're going to win the deal if that's what you predicate. It's a bit like doing emotion and seeing the connection between emotion, for example, and the propensity to advocate and buy more. And in a world that does not yet exist, you'd have a CEO saying, I want a 10% increase in joy because I know that's going to derive me more revenue. We just don't see these connections yet in a way. And it just gets me to think, from everything you've just said there, Brian, that it's really a discipline at the end of the day of reminding ourselves to always begin the question, the decision with, what does the customer want, rather than what our priorities are. And that has got to be something reinforced day in, day out, from the very top right the way down. Otherwise, we default to a very, very long embedded history of thinking we know best, which will then lead, to your point, to bad design, to short-termism, only to discover, oops, I got it wrong. How do I now sort of back out of that problem and somehow make it work? Because that problem that you've just talked about is repeated over and over and over. And actually, we haven't even got to the point at the moment about what's happening in omnichannel, but you just multiply 2 or 3 of those bad decisions and you have a train crash in terms of seamless engagement.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is that, and I wrote it down, the quote, because Don Schreibenreif, my old colleague at Gartner, said it once: most organizations focus their investment of what customers think of us. So that's a very inside out way of thinking, instead of what do customers think of themselves, and of therefore how do they want it to be treated, and how do they want to engage. And that's a completely overlooked opportunity that you can easily mend in an organization just by asking that different question. And it comes back to inside out thinking versus outside in thinking. And that brings me back to an earlier point that you said, okay, what can we do within the organizations with employees? Well, there needs to be a culture of thinking from the outside in, and therefore having an understanding of what would be effortless for this customer for them to engage with us.
Yes.
And then a lot of people go to self-service because that would be then the thing to do. But I think, then we're getting already a little bit further into the omni-channel aspect of things. It's a mix of different engagement capabilities, given the context where I'm at, of what I will use and how I will use it. And that's where the train wreck goes even further. If we are making the wrong decisions already at the top, not having the culture, but now also getting into the wrong design again of really operationalizing all of those channels that all of a sudden need to work with each other.
So let's move on. Let's move into that space. Just to put a full stop on what we've just talked about there, I think that's an excellent point about the mindset and the questioning. And I'm always fond of saying the trouble is with us is that we actually have split personalities. We're both employees and colleagues, and we're also customers. So there's nothing foreign in the customer mindset because we all embody it and are that. And yet the most curious thing is this, and people might want to do this, which is if you go into the front, into your place of work, maybe it's a revolving door, which it often is. You walk inside, suddenly you have an inside out view. You walk outside again, and suddenly you can replicate the outside in view. And it's crazy, isn't it? How we seamlessly flip between those two universes in terms of the priorities that take over. And I was wondering, actually, incidentally, whether or not hybrid would have done anything to that soapbox agenda that we have concentrated in the organization, sitting around the table, talking about our reality, and the customer literally gets pushed away from that. And I just wondered whether or not actually we'd have a better focus, but it seems that hasn't necessarily changed. So to me, just to summarize that point, focus on what matters, the customer reality, remains an elusive skill and perception that we still have really got to work on, because it is the a priori, isn't it? It's the foundation aspect of everything that subsequently flows from that point. And if I am guarding that on behalf of the rest of the organization, I need to be obsessed about how does the organization talk about the challenge, and to constantly remind people it begins with what matters to the customer. I tell you the other way around, when I first came across the language of customer experience, I came from an experiential training background, and I know what experiential means.
Mm-hmm.
I often wondered what businesses would do with that word and how they would destroy it by routinizing it. And I do think that I've been proved right in many respects, that experience is defined, for me at any way, by virtue of the fact you cannot argue it. It's not like an opinion. An experience is what it is. And so therefore, from the customer's perspective, you just need to understand what matters to them rather than argue yourself into saying they are part of that segment, they have that persona, therefore they will behave, and they will be delighted when we eventually offer this to them. The patronage in that mindset versus the humility of bothering to find out what is that person's priority.
Yeah. I 100% agree with everything you just said. I do want to add one thing that always makes it difficult in the mix. Now that I have been had the opportunity to work and be one of a C-level executive in a multi-$100 company.
Yes.
It is still also about what's the bottom line?
Yeah.
How much margin am I making? And am I keeping my shareholders happy? Unfortunately, because sometimes being customer centric is going to cost you so much that it hurts the bottom line or even the top line in that respect.
So let's get into that. That's huge. This is where the rubber hits the road, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely, because that's what it is, and I can make it strategic, and I can make it also tactical for you. This is the strategic perspective. The company needs to be run by your C team, and they need to make it profitable because most of the time that's what it's all about. So on a tactical level, and I come back to designing the experience again, designing the journey of what is the most favorable journey for the constituency you're designing it for, always have to do also with processes.
Yes.
And sometimes it hits a process that is so operational efficient, but so horribly designed from a customer perspective that you need to have an honest conversation with yourself as an organization in saying, am I or am I not going to change this process, which is so awfully operational efficient, in order to give satisfaction to the customer? And that's where the money aspect is really coming in. And the oldest example that I have from probably 1995 or something like that, when I was working in a bank, was the fact that if I needed to do a loan application, and over time you can use different kinds of channels, which is fantastic, and you can follow your loan approval or not. There is always a moment where there's a black box of really understanding what that loan approval is all about.
Yeah.
So from a journey perspective, that's a bad experience there because you have no influence, you have no insights into that loan approval process.
Yes.
But from a banking perspective, that's most of the time operational, very efficient on how they are doing that. So that's where there's a contradiction in terms of having a customer journey versus a organizational process, which cannot help in that respect. Well, and that's how designing needs to be done.
No, I understand that, but I also think that it's not quite such a dislocated set of realities, because I don't think CX is meant to just be a feel-good philosophy, which is at odds with commercial reality, right?
True.
And I also think that those two worlds haven't come together clearly enough, because what we're talking about really is that, in the very simple language of years and years ago, it's easier and cheaper to keep a customer than lose a customer and all that good stuff, and that's the fundamental point of everything that we're talking about here. And it strikes me that we don't yet have enough visibility on losing customers. We talk abstractly about churn, and I can, you know as well as I do the number of churn algorithms there are out there, but that's rather abstracted in terms of reporting.
Yes.
And I don't think that we have as much visibility to know the consequences of particular journeys and particular processes and particular policies. Because again, we can add up the amount in an average way of what it's cost us to get these people, but hardly anybody has an equivalent view, because I still think organizations are more addicted to finding new customers than keeping existing customers. How many people have we got called existing customer director as opposed to new sales director and revenue and all of that stuff? So it belies the fact that our attention from a commercial point of view isn't very savvy still. So back to the point of saying sometimes, you have to wise up and take the tough decisions. I would still argue that, in fact, if you had correct visibility on the real things that matter, and still effort is going to be a quintessentially central point to a customer. It's too hard, I ain't going to do it, I'm off eventually. Yes. You've lost somebody where you could have kept somebody. And over time, that's where the money is sitting. Yes, because you tend to get more profit out of existing customers if you look after them, in most instances. But again, I would say that most, that concept, that insight isn't run rigorously through sales, marketing, and service programs in a way that absolutely squeezes the pip out of that point, And
I don't think it will ever happen if we are not changing the equation of breaking down the silos and organizing ourselves around the customer or the customer group, or a customer focus, or however you want to call it, because otherwise we will not work together. Otherwise we will do our own thing and it will be disjoint one way or the other. And we will probably also not make it profitable to come back to the top and bottom line in that respect. And organizing yourself in that way becomes even more important now that we have all of that data, that now that we really, if we want to, can fully understand who this customer is, how they behave, and how the whole group of customers more or less behave. And therefore we can much better design what engagement channels, to take it one step more in a technical way, work for them, instead of another focus group where marketing, sales, and service needs to be done and other engagement capabilities will work. Then you will probably optimize the way that you are engaging with your customer, have that retention like you are mentioning, but also attracting more customers because of the effortless experience that they will probably have with your organization and your brand. And also organizational wise, you all have the same mindset of working together and get compensated together in one way, instead of being siloed again through marketing all the way through sport.
Excellent. So let's bring this segment of conversation to a close, saying that it begins with customer, not our view, but really essentially them, which then informs and drives good versus poor service design. And we, to be happy about it, are seeing a world where the technology is certainly enabling more of that data to be aggregated, brought together for a more clear view of what the customer need is.